Moscow. Здравствуйте. Today, Moscow is the financial and political center of Russia. With a population of about 13 million, 1/10 of the country's population lives there. Compare this with the population of the also large St. Petersburg, whose population is over 5 million. Moscow began as a small trading post and was first mentioned in the Chronicles in 1147. As you know, toward the end of the Mongol yoke, Moscow grew in power due to the Muscovite princes' subservience to the Mongol Khans. In the year 1396, the Orthodox Church began to transfer its seat of power to Moscow, and thus Moscow became Russia's holy city, with a ring of monasteries rising up around the city in satellite villages, which are known today as belonging to the Golden Ring. In 1453, Constantinople fell to the Turks, leaving Moscow to claim itself as the last bastion of Christianity. In 1472, Ivan III solidified Moscow's inheritance as the Third Rome when he married the niece of the last emperor of Byzantium. The center and oldest part of Moscow is the Kremlin. In Russian, the word Kreml means fortress and comes from the Tatar language, meaning fortified. Compare this again to St. Petersburg, whose center is the Peter and Paul Fortress. For those of you who know some Russian, the word used to describe this fortress is krepost, not Kreml. For this reason, we do not call the Peter and Paul Fortress a Kremlin in English. One side of the Moscow Kremlin runs along the Moscow River. The Kremlin walls form a kind of triangle and contain 68 acres. Inside, there are churches, parks, streets, an armory, a theater, and of course, government buildings. In this photo, you can see all of this beyond the red brick wall, golden cupolas, trees, and green-roofed buildings. Also in the Kremlin are the famous Tsar Bell and Tsar Cannon. Both of these are the largest of their kind and were made too large to be functional. The armory is a must-see for visitors to Moscow. It is Russia's treasure house, containing not only armor, but royal carriages, thrones, crowns, and what they refer to as precious vestments worn by the royalty. You'll recall that the city plan of St. Petersburg resembles a goosefoot, with streets radiating out from the Peter and Paul Fortress and Admiralty Building, and with canals running perpendicular to those streets. Moscow grew more organically in expanding walled circles, moving further and further outside the Kremlin. Everyone has heard of Red Square, but many people aren't clear as to what it is or how it's related to the Kremlin. Some people think that the word red refers to communism and the Bolsheviks. Actually, red is a mistranslation in English. It actually means beautiful. The words red and beautiful in Russian are linguistically related, krasny and krasivy. One wall of the Kremlin runs along one side of Red Square. You can see this on the right side of the photo. Along this wall, on Red Square, rests Lenin's tomb. You can also see this on the right side of the photo. Lenin's embalmed body has been on display in this mausoleum since 1924, with the exception of his temporary removal during World War II, or as the Russians referred to it, of course, the Great Patriotic War. Bordering another side of Red Square, directly across from Lenin and the Kremlin Wall, is an enormous shopping mall commonly referred to as GUM. This is the building on the left. GUM is an acronym that stands for the State Department Store. The building is known for its beautiful arched glass ceiling with a steel framework, which at the time it was built resembled European train stations. Red Square's main attraction is the iconic Cathedral of Vasily the Blessed, more commonly known in English as St. Basil's. This you can see in the center of the photo. It is named after a holy fool who was buried there. The structure is 8 cupolas around a central tent roof. Today, the church is known for its colorful exterior, although it was originally a white church with golden domes. The church on the spilled blood in St. Petersburg somewhat resembles this church. It was Ivan the Terrible who ordered St. Basil's to be built. to celebrate Russia's capture of the city Kazan from the Mongols. Today, St. Basil's is a museum and not a working church, save for one day per year. The main street in Moscow that you should know is called Tverskaya. It runs from Red Square to the northwest toward the city of Tver, and from there it goes on to St. Petersburg. It used to be referred to as the Tsar's Road, since the carriages would drive down this road to reach the Kremlin for the Tsar's coronations. For much of the Soviet period, it was called Gorky Street, in honor of the celebrated Soviet author Maxim Gorky. Just off Tverskaya, and very near Red Square, is the famous Bolshoi Theater that stages ballets and operas. In Russian, Bolshoi simply means big. Next to this theater is the Mali Theater, which means the small theater. Both of them stand on Theater Square. The architecture is neoclassical, featuring a portico with 8 columns, above which is a statue of Apollo in a 4-horse chariot. Today, the statue graces the 100-ruble note. In 2005, due to what had been termed a catastrophic condition, the theater had to close its doors for major renovations that included removing the crumbling foundation by hand. 6 years and $760 million later, it opened its doors again. The importance of this theater to Russian and Soviet culture cannot be overstated. Another site in Moscow that everyone should know about is the infamous Lubyanka. This building is just a couple blocks east of the Bolshoi Theater and very near a famous department store called Children's World. The close proximity of Children's World to Lubyanka gave birth to a very popular and very dark Soviet joke that referred to Lubyanka as being Adults' World, up the street from Children's World. This is because Lubyanka is the former KGB headquarters and prison. Many people were tortured and killed in this building, and so it behooves tourists to be aware of this when walking by. The building was originally an insurance company when it was built in 1908. Architecturally, its style was called Neo-Baroque. Today, it still houses some offices of the Federal Security Service. There is one last building you need to know about. It is located in a neighborhood to the south called Zamoskvorechye, which means beyond the Moscow River. In 1892, the wealthy merchant Pavel Tretyakov donated his collection of Russian art to the city of Moscow. Then, in 1903, a new facade was added to his former home, now the museum. It was based on drawings by the artist Viktor Vaznetsov, who had been inspired by medieval Russian design. The roof is shaped like a traditional woman's headdress called a kokoshnik. Below the roof, along the top of the building, stretch a couple of bands. The upper band contains a ceramic frieze in the symbolist style, and the lower band represents an old Russian manuscript. Finally, one cannot possibly visit Moscow without checking out its famous metro system. This underground subway system boasts not only efficiency and cleanliness, but also spectacular marble stations in an array of styles and themes. The station's themes range from the proletariat to aviation to Dostoevsky to the periodic table of the elements. During the Cold War era, some stations were added that were deeper underground so that they could double as nuclear bomb shelters. Спасибо за ваше внимание.